Welcome back to the ZIZO Effect podcast. This season, we're all about getting fresh perspectives from every level of the call center organizations, from the folks on the front lines to the decision makers at the top. Today, we're really excited to have Negra Tutundzic, the employee engagement team lead at Wayfair, joining us on our show. She's got some incredible insights on what truly drives engagement in this space. So sit tight and get ready. It's game time. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the ZIZO Effect podcast. I'm your host, Jimmy Shabat, and today we have a very special guest with us, Negra Tutundzic, who is the employee engagement team lead at Wayfair, which is going to be really exciting. We're really excited to talk to you. Thank you for joining us today, Negra.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Of course, we love to share with our audience a little bit about our guest personally. So why don't you give us a little bit of background of who you are and what your interests are? And we'd love a nice little fun fact about you as well.
Awesome. Okay. So I am based in San Francisco. I've lived here for about 8 years. Right now I'm wearing a sweater because it's foggy weather. We don't get a real summer in San Francisco. It's foggy and windy. So I'm a little chillier than the rest of the nation. So if anyone's wondering why I'm wearing so many layers, that's why. But before I moved to San Francisco, I grew up in Rochester, New York, which just last week or a couple of weeks ago, Jimmy and I realized we are from the same area in New York, which is a really nice way to kind of connect and talk about the Buffalo Bills for a second.
Yes.
But I grew up in Rochester, New York, but I was originally born in Bosnia. So my parents and my sister and I moved to the U.S. when I was 6 years old, landed in Rochester. That explains why I don't have an accent. I'm very Americanized at this point. Started my career in Rochester and then ended up moving to the West Coast to kind of explore different options with my career. And obviously a lot going on, especially in San Francisco area as far as the type of clientele and the type of thinking going on. So it really kind of attracted me out to the West Coast for that reason, aside from the weather.
How long ago did you move to the West Coast?
It was about 8 years ago.
8 years ago. Okay.
Yeah.
So were you in Rochester for that whole time up until 8 years ago?
Yep. I lived in Rochester most of my life since about first grade, all the way through like college, and then a couple of years after college. And I worked in Rochester for a couple of years full time, and then transferred out to the West Coast at my company at the time.
Nice. So you were born in Bosnia. So correct me if I'm wrong. Is the language called Bosnian or is it another language?
Yeah. So
okay.
I think historically it's been Yugoslavian, but obviously the historical context, Yugoslavia is no longer a country. So you've got your Croatian, Serbian, Bosnian, but at the basis they're the same, just the dialects a little bit.
Gotcha. So do you speak your native tongue?
I do. Yeah. I mean, not like super well. Yeah.
So fun fact about myself. So I'm first generation here. So my parents were born in Lebanon, immigrated for some reason to Buffalo, New York, of all places.
Yeah.
We always wondered why. It's cold. But in any case, I also grew up learning the Lebanese language before learning the English language.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure, like you, I've forgotten more than I remember. Could definitely carry a conversation, understand more than I can speak it. But you immersed me in the culture. I'm right back to where I started. Let's switch over a little bit to your career life. So you moved to San Francisco 8 years ago. Give us kind of your career track. Walk us through your journey and how you arrived at Wayfair.
Yes. So it actually all started with a course I took in college called Consumer Research. It really lit a light bulb in me. I really loved the combination of taking data and input and feedback and making business decisions based on that from consumers. So that's actually kind of where my career started, was consumer research and insights. I did an internship when I started in London at a research firm, really learned kind of the different questions clients were asking, things like that. And really at the basis of it is, how do our customers feel about our brand? How do they respond to our brand? What is relevant to them, what resonates. And I just really like that blend of numbers and psychology and human behavior. I've always been like a very observant person. So that was actually the last 15 years of my life was consumer research and insights and strategy. I worked at a comms agency called Edelman for about 10 years before I came to Wayfair. So my job really there was to really develop a conversation, a relationship with our clients to really understand what do they really want to know and what's the best way to ask it, what methodology to use, how do we get creative with our questioning to get the insights that they need to build, whether it's a communication strategy, a campaign, a marketing strategy, things like that. And so I've really, really loved that work. It's very dear to my heart. I love looking at numbers and finding a story and a narrative. That's kind of that magic sauce that kind of kept me there for a long time, or kept me in that career for a long time. So it's kind of funny how I actually ended up at Wayfair in a completely different field, employee engagement. It's not consumer research at all. It's a completely different target audience, if you will. But how I ended up kind of in this realm is, as we know, during the pandemic, a lot of these big corporations who had offices went virtual. It wasn't safe to be in office anymore. So when I worked with clients like Facebook and Salesforce and Microsoft, and traditionally they would come to my team and say, hey, we're rolling out this new product, or we want to know our customers' thoughts on XYZ. It actually turned to, how do we talk to our employees? They are now also our customers. We need to keep them here. We need to keep them happy. How do we navigate this new employee space, workplace space when everyone's working from home? I mean, for all those who have been impacted by that, how different it is to collaborate, to communicate. I mean, I don't think I was on Slack that much in my whole career until after the pandemic, because you could just walk up to someone's desk and be like, hey, quick question, right? Or you jump into a conference room to brainstorm. So a lot of the work, at least that was falling into my lap at the time, was how do we talk to our employees? How are they feeling? Like, what is our culture right now? Like, what is our employee value proposition, essentially, to keep these people? Because a lot of people are also leaving the corporate space, and now there's a lot of industries too. So it was this sort of sudden urge to understand, like, how do we retain people in this new environment and treat them like human?
I love the transition because, the two aspects of your career kind of take you on both sides of the conversation between customer and frontline worker, right? Yeah. And you first learn the psychology and the data that supports that psychology from the consumer aspect, right? And now, your role as team engagement lead is about engaging the other side of the conversation, the person on the other side of the phone, which is the employee of customer service. And we're going to get into a little bit of the number of people, because you're the people that roll up to you, or the departments that you're in charge of, is pretty vast. It's close to 2,000 users, agents. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That's a pretty large number. And I want to really dive into some of how you handle that. But first, specifically, what is your role? Like, if you were to describe your role at Wayfair in one paragraph, how would you describe it?
I would describe it as culture building. My job is to build culture, which is a very amorphous and buzzwordy term, but to kind of break it down, as team engagement lead, I have also team members that work with me. So it's not just me, but our remit really, like, the programs that we develop and the experiences that we design in Wayfair is meant to engage the customer service, Wayfair customer service teams. So that's the 2,000 or so folks you just mentioned. So they're call center, frontline roles. Yep. It's a tough, not stress-free environment. It's a lot harder to have time to interact with your coworkers. You're on phones, you're on chat, you're on email servicing customers, because Wayfair service, that's our number one priority. So really my team is there to navigate their current workflows and their day-to-day, but infuse a little bit of culture and peopling. I like to call it, like, let's just be humans for a little bit every quarter. Kind of how that comes to life through a bunch of different programs is recognition programs. Those are definitely table stakes at any company. So that's a lot where our time and money and investments goes into, is making sure that people feel celebrated and that their contributions mean something. It can be a very thankless job to be a customer service agent, but there's so much more that they do outside of the millions of policies and details and tools that they have to navigate in one single customer conversation. There's so much else they also do. So we try to make sure that our leadership is talking about that. It's thanking them. There are formal structures set in place. Everyone's busy, but there are formal programs set in place to say thank you at the end of the day. So that's really a lot of my time, at least from a strategy perspective, is, are we using the right tools? Are we using the best practices? How do you say thank you authentically in such a nuanced, complex tech environment? That's kind of
culture. You had said that's part of your role is to build, develop, maintain, and curate culture in your organization in Wayfair. There's a statistic that came from an article, Great Place to Work, that companies with high trust cultures see 50% higher employment productivity and 74% lower stress levels. Now, how does your company define culture? How does Wayfair define its culture, or what is the type of culture it's trying to create, and how does it communicate it, and cascade that messages down the pipeline?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because culture is it's such a big umbrella word. Like, how do you build tactical work around that, right? Like, what does it mean to do culture? So one of the first questions when I entered this role, I've been at Wayfair for 2 years, but this official team lead role I entered in January. And one of the first few questions I asked of service senior leadership was, when you think about Wayfair service, what do you want to be known for, from your employees? And that started kind of getting us thinking about, okay, we want people to feel recognized. We want people to feel like they belong to something bigger. We want people to feel like they can say and give us feedback openly without repercussion. So that kind of started giving us categories of efforts that we need to build in formally as part of my team's scope. So that's kind of the exercise that we took to define culture. It really is, at the end of the day, what do we want people to think of when they think of working for Wayfair service? They want to feel supported. They want to feel like they belong. Those are the intrinsic things, right? There's, of course, compensation and benefits and shift schedules. That's all the stuff that my team doesn't decide or define. Those are obviously factors driven by business decisions outside of my realm. But what we control and what we can help strategize with our leaders is outside of the mechanics of work. What's the intrinsic value of staying here, right? That's really the culture.
Sense of belonging, you said, that is one that I keep hearing, especially with the younger generation. A lot of times decisions are made to work for a company due to compensation packages, right? May be a factor. But a bigger factor is starting to happen is what does this company believe in? What is the culture of this organization? And that's what will help retain the talent in there. So I know that Wayfair is a very progressive company. They have a team dedicated to engagement with their staff. So which is great to see. And you're seeing more and more companies doing this because the alternative cost is high attrition, right? What are some of the initiatives? You've heard from your customers being your employees, right? Because that's who your audience is that you're asking these questions. So what are you doing to implement to create that sense of belonging, to build that sense of purpose?
We're learning every day on how to do that. So I don't think I have top 5 things you should do to do this. It's definitely, it's navigating a landscape that's changing really fast at Wayfair service, because there's, I'll give you an example. When I first joined Wayfair service, we had mostly just phone call centers and email. Then over time, we became more omni-channel, right? There's chat, there's AI bots now in certain customer contact situations. So the types of employees and their skills were also changing. And so we had to kind of make sure that we were speaking to all the different types of employees and departments that were springing up to meet customer needs, and basically inserting that into how we talked about culture and who we included. So that's kind of a broad statement. But to answer your question specifically is how do you create a sense of belonging? It's honestly what I've found is successful and where I see the excitement is when people learn about other teams. What's that team doing? That's cool. How can I get a part of that? Wow, that project that just launched, what's the point of it? How can I contribute to it? So I try to be as in tune with all the different changes happening in the Wayfair business and all the initiatives and the program rollouts that are happening on the business side so that we can be like, okay, if there's an appreciation event coming up or there's some sort of networking event coming up that my team's already planning, let's pull those details in because the more people know what's happening at the company and what other people like them are doing, it inspires them to maybe reach out to that person and be like, hey, how can I get involved? That's a great development area, right? Upskilling yourself. It also be like, wow, this company's, to your point, really progressive. They're really testing out new things or they are trying new things or whatever. So I think it widens people's lens of like what's going on outside of just like your team. So that's, I think, like one of the things I always strive to do as far as belonging because it creates just a bigger world for people, I think.
You're probably the third or fourth birthday. So and part of our theme this year for season 2 is to listen and to learn, from people like yourself and, also the frontline workers, the managers and the executives. And one of the topics or the points that have been made that I've heard multiple times now is exactly that, is that there is a future beyond the current position that they're at.
Yes.
I don't know how to categorize that and how to label that, whether it's hope, whether it's, career tracking, it's, it could be a feeder because frontline workers, really, it's not something that people want to build a career around, right? So they want to know that there's a higher purpose to their career with that organization, especially if they believe in that organization. Talk to us about kind of like, is a call center a feeder into some of the other leadership roles or other departments?
Organically speaking, I mean, all of our frontline managers, I want to say all because don't quote me on that, but most of them, as far as I know, anecdotally, started as an entry level frontline agent. They show promise, they show leadership skills, they get into a frontline manager position, and then from there, so forth, right? So I think literally half my team has come from the frontline. We're now on the support side, right? So teams like myself support frontline agents in their workplace experience. They came from the frontline space, and their experience is invaluable because I came in from outside of Wayfair, completely different career. I bring kind of the strategy and decision making, but they keep it real for me. They're like, well, that's actually not how we talk about it on the front line, or that's, way out of left field. So that organic growth and development is so, so valuable. And it's, I think, definitely something Wayfair Service can hang their hat on is that they've done that really well. It's I think it honestly happens organically. My team doesn't have any sort of effort behind that. I mean, I think that's definitely a learning and development and training and that's kind of their remit to make sure that people are put in positions where they can grow like that. But yeah, in my experience, definitely a huge thing.
So we see a lot of management level people coming from the frontline space. And sometimes that translates very well. Sometimes it doesn't, because there's a certain skill set, people skill set that sometimes, individuals don't have. They're highly skilled in their role as a frontline worker, but they're not as skilled in people management. We find that, part of the leadership role is to continue to maintain company culture. And tell us about the role of leaders in maintaining and developing culture within Wayfair.
Yeah. If not all, most of the programs, aka structures, processes that my team builds is for the frontline managers. So yes, at the end of the day, our target audience, our customers are the frontline agents, but they're not the ones engaging with my team's programs and my team's events. It's the frontline managers because that's where the cascade happens, right? So for example, we have a monthly program called Moments That Matter. It gives frontline managers access to gift cards, swag, gifts, whatever they would like to personalize for their team member who maybe just got a new dog or is moving into a new house. we work with them to make sure that they know that these resources are available to them and the right way to use it to create those deeper, trusting, personal connections and culture on their team. So really at the end of the day, like the target audience for what my team is building and designing from a programmatic standpoint is actually for the frontline managers, because they are the boots on the ground of the team culture. And they get to decide how they want to use this stuff too. Every team is different personalities, different preferences in every team. Like that's really where the flexibility needs to come in from my team standpoint. But yeah, like you hit it nail on the head. Like it is the managers, the direct managers who are coaching day in, day out, having their team meetings weekly. Like I'm not in those spaces. I'm one person. I can't be, but my team can at least help build the resources, the tools, the platforms through which the managers then engage and basically bring that cultural piece to life on their team.
So that's a good point there. The point of engagement, right? So the point that you just made kind of touches on three different subjects, right? One is how do you personalize, right? So you're talking about incentives, you're talking about rewards, right? But that's just a mechanism to engage, right? It's a way not just to reward, because I think people love the reward aspect of it, but when you personalize the reward, where you have the manager go and talk to an individual, not for the purpose of figuring out what reward, but hey, let me get to know you on a personal level. What's going on in your life. And, when you create that connection, that emotional, personal connection between the manager and the agent, and then you supplement it with the reward that is, again, personalized for that individual, I think that's where you maximize the culture building aspect of it, is because they feel like, hey, they're listening, they understand, they care. The empathy component of it plays a role. But engagement is a really, really important part of culture, right? Because you can try to build everything. If your employees are disengaged, nothing is going to stick. There's another statistics. Deloitte has a study that shows that highly engaged teams show 21% greater profitability and 41% reduction in absenteeism. How do you foster a culture of engagement across the organization? I know, like you said, you're one department, you're providing tools, but how is that messaging cascaded down? You just mentioned a very good example, which is the reward aspect of it. What other examples do you guys use, or what other techniques or strategies do you use to engage?
I mean, communication is kind of fundamental, right? Being really understanding where our audience is, mostly on Slack. No call center agent is going to be like checking their email, right? So it's really understanding where are they, where can we meet them, and how do we make sure that they're aware of the culture that we're building, what they have access to, sending a lot of reminders. Everyone's busy. There's a lot of Slack channels. Just understanding the flow of work is a big component of how we engage. Is where can we meet them? How can we make it exciting? Also relevant, like real time. For example, I have a team that is on deck during business hours to distribute those awards in real time to managers. When it's time to say that thank you to the person, that they get that reward pretty quickly, because that's where you get the biggest impact, right? It's like
the real time feedback loop,
not this like 3-week delay, like where's my gift kind of thing. So there's a lot of I think it's just timeliness, really clear communication. Also making sure it's genuinely expressed and it doesn't sound too businessy, like a robot wrote it. We really try to bring the human aspect to how we engage with people. So be we have themes and seasons we can play into. It's back to school season right now. So we kind of play on that to kind of get people to sort of catch their eye in some way on maybe an event that we're running and make it feel relevant to their lives. A lot of parents right now are in back to school shopping. So really understanding our audience of who are they? Where are they? How are they? What's the zeitgeist right now? One kind of tactical example is I'll sit on these weekly business reviews every week, and I will listen to all the frontline managers talk about where their metrics are, how their KPIs are doing, feedback that they're getting from their team members in their team huddles. And that gives me a lot of great context into, what, we're about to roll this event out, but they're really stressed out. Their sites are focused on something else. Maybe it's not the right time to engage them. They don't have time. And that's a great way for me to know when to engage too, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Technology plays a pretty vital role in today's workplace, especially with it being remote or hybrid. You mentioned Slack as a key tool that you use. What other technologies do you use outside of that? I mean, are you collecting information through surveys? Is there a survey tool that you use? How are you, cataloging this data? I mean, you're a data person. You've collected data to analyze that for the consumer side of things. What tools are you using for the agent side of things?
Yep. So there's a biannual kind of employee voice, we call it employee voice survey. That's designed and more so administered by our talent management team. But being in the engagement space and really needing to understand our employees, I work very closely with them to get that data and make sure that questions are added to that survey that are relevant for my team. They're actually actionable. So that's kind of the big one, right? Biannual, that really then determines and defines action planning and where do we prioritize? Okay, if recognition is really falling short, let's amp it up a little bit, whatever. Other tools, I would say we have multiple dashboards that I've built with and for my team to track the utilization of our programs, because that's a good pulse check on, are the managers engaging with the tools that we are giving them? Where are the hotspots? Which departments, which teams are really using them consistently? And how can we compare their voice results to that? Are they seeing a higher employee experience score? Are they getting more positive feedback in this survey if they're the managers who are consistently leveraging the resources that we're providing them versus like the lower users, right? So there's a couple of dashboards and sort of I'll kind of marry the data together to say, okay, here's the input and here's the output. Like, hey, leaders, this is, it's technology, but it's, just kind of leveraging, data that we're already getting and collecting anyway. Utilization with our programs, marry that with the voice survey. That's a great way to see like the impact on the input. Another technology I would say qualifies as technologies, but it's constantly looking for partners to work with in the kind of employee community type space. So for example, a big partner we have is Confetti. They have these like amazing hosted interactive events that they set up for you. There's a professional host and they do like trivia games or get to know your coworker or coworker feud. And so they're just like fun things that we'll do on a quarterly basis to build just some fun into the workplace and get people to get to know each other in different ways. So it's a technology that we leverage. I mean, it's really more kind of a virtual event offering, but they have some awesome tools that they kind of takes us out of like the normal standard like Google Meet space and puts people in a little bit of a different virtual interaction. Yeah. So there's, a bunch of different, there's not kind of one solution to engagement. You gotta have to
do a bunch of things. Yeah. So I'm going to challenge you here. I'm going to challenge you to be efficient with your words. And if there was a takeaway or that our audience could take from you in terms of a strategy for engagement, to put it as succinctly as possible, what are the key ingredients to building a strategy, to implementing that strategy, to continue to check the pulse of that strategy and rinse and repeat? What would you say is something that our audience can use?
Understand your audience, understand what motivates them, understand their workday, understand why they came to work and what they're looking for. So I think that kind of goes back to the motivation piece, but really there, because you're trying to get it to the human level, right? That's kind of what I would say is start with knowing your people and work back from there.
Beautiful. Switching topics. We talked about, you had mentioned something about, it didn't use the exact word burnout, but you had mentioned, hey, it's a lot of stress in frontline workers, right? Most of the time, you're probably dealing with disgruntled consumers who maybe want to do a return, and it could be kind of a heavy burden to roll. You're the frontline worker. You're taking all of that anger. You've got to convert that into customer satisfaction. 67% of workers say burnout has worsened since the start of the pandemic. How are you addressing is number one, is that, do you see that as being a real issue? Does the numbers translate to what you've seen in the organization? Is that a real thing?
It just being a stressful job. There's so many other factors that I tend to hear about that contribute to burnout, especially in the service call center space. I mean, it's a lot of emotional cargo you take on to you're interacting with somebody else on the other side of that phone, and it's hard to not let it get to you, especially if it's an emotionally charged one. So
quick pivot, because that you mentioned emotional issues to have to deal with, and that is, I think the context that you're putting it in is the conversation between the consumer and the frontline worker, which leads to burnout, which is what we were just talking about, but it's related to mental health, and it has an impact on mental health. And there's other issues outside of work that, again, can create other mental health issues. So, there's another statistic from Deloitte that I've got here I'd like to share. 85% of employees say they would more likely stay in their job if their employer showed more empathy. So is that part of the strategy? And is that the part where you talk about engagement and reward kind of fit into that category of empathy? Or is there a little bit more trying to understand the challenges that each individual is facing and trying to create a unique solution for that individual?
I mean, I think from my team's standpoint, it's a little bit of education for leadership and frontline managers to understand that sometimes saying thank you isn't enough. Like, be more specific, really be genuine with what you're recognizing this person did, because people can see right through a template, boilerplate. Thank you so much for your help. Like some of the trainings, for example, or some of the resources that we develop for our recognition programs is how to write a quality nomination. And those tips and pointers included in those trainings are: be empathetic, showcase what the impact of this person's contribution actually did, help you meet your project goals in this way. And I think empathy is just an important ingredient in recognition. It's not the only ingredient, but I think knowing actually what it took that person to do that above and beyond behavior and empathizing with that makes recognition that much stronger. So like to put it from like a tactical, like what my team's responsible, like we'll implement those types of reminders and just be like, take a moment and be real with this. It's not a check the box activity. Don't do it while you're on calls. Take 20 minutes and write a quality nomination for a monthly program or monthly award, and it sounds transactional because you have to like write it and you submit it and but the content in there needs to be human. It needs to have that empathy. So
how realistic is it to scale that? I mean, you have what I would call an enterprise size level workforce in Wayfair services. And there are much bigger organizations and then there are much smaller organizations. So how much resources would need to be put into it to be able to do that at scale effectively? I'll put it that, because you could still do it. It's just to do it effectively and to scale it across the workforce.
I mean, honestly, it's all about how we talk about stuff. And like, there certain leadership, and I'm not saying at Wayfair Service, just in other corporations, like all they talk about is numbers and the business, right? And they're not infusing any of here's what it took us to get here. And so going back to our conversation about like culture building and what goes into a culture, it's also like, as you're providing updates in an email or presenting in a town hall as a leader, where are your slides about the people who are behind this, right? Making sure that content and that sharing and they're actually talk tracking that empathy and living it. I think that's how you scale it. Like you can
embed it into the culture and then make it visible to everybody.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's like how you talk about stuff. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. If the entire workforce, if that messaging is cascaded down through leadership, but it's embedded into the culture and everybody sees it, You don't necessarily need that pat on the back each and every day, that personalized pat on the back, but you know that it's happening. And when your time comes, it's going to happen with you as well. And I think that's more of a culture. Would you agree that it's more of a culture aspect, that empathy, that personalization? Because to scale it, I think you would need 2 or 3 full-time people for, every 10 people, right?
Yeah.
I think it's very tough.
I mean, the other piece of it too, to scale it, is the frontline managers in our case. They know their team. They know what is going on, the level of work happening. So they'll tap into the resources we give them as far as like the moments that matter, gifts or whatever. And they use their judgment on when do I leverage and say thank you in this way or say thank you that way. So they really help us scale it, in their own way. We're just not there like monitoring every move, but it's built into their expectations as a manager, I would say. That's kind of the other side of it, is umbrella, leadership, culture, talking about it, making sure it's living and breathing in content that they're presenting. But it's also the managers knowing that this is an expectation of you, that these resources exist, use them at, when you feel like it's going to make an impact on your team. And that's sort of been kind of ground up and then bottomed down.
The ways that you're able to, I'll put this in quotes, bend the rules, is the work from home, right? Are you guys fully remote? Are you fully in-house? Are you a hybrid? What is the current setup at Wayfair?
So Wayfair's service is, I want to say 90% remote. We have a call center in Athens, Georgia, and then we have some folks in Galway. It is part of like the service teams, but yeah, mostly remote. And
mostly remote. And have you found that to be beneficial with respect to from a productivity standpoint or a recruitment standpoint? And what areas is it beneficial? What areas is it a detriment?
I mean, I don't have direct data on this as far as productivity goes and recruiting data, but I do know that it allows us to be very nimble and also span a lot more different time zones. I think over the last few years, definitely our customer base has grown at Wayfair. And so I think a bit of the decision making behind that was we need to meet our customers where they are, right? Which is sometimes 24/7 because they're in so many different markets. So I think that was definitely a decision that was made, I think, in lieu of some of the customer needs. I don't have a lot of context of like why we don't have more brick and mortar. That's not sort of I don't have visibility into that, but I have, my understanding is definitely just being a global service force has helped us meet our SLAs and really be kind of a top competitor, I think, in the market. And
do you have people? Do you work multiple shifts? Like, is it a 24/7 department, or do you use the time zones to help?
Yeah, I mean, there's outsourced like in India and such, but I'm not sure honestly what their time zone or what their coverage is. But as far as the North America based teams, those are not 24/7 technically.
What specific successes have you observed with remote work in your organization? Is there something that you can say, hey, we've been better off since we went remote? And I know that you haven't been there, too long of a period of time. So it's probably hard to remember a time pre-COVID or pre-remote. But is there anything that has kind of stuck out where collectively leadership at Wayfair says, you know what, prior to this, we weren't able to do that?
I think one thing that I've heard and is definitely you hear it from a lot of people when you ask them, what's your Wayfair story? And a lot of people will be like, I was on this team, that I was on this department, that I was on that team. So I think the remote landscape helps people like just move about a lot easier, try new things, get exposed to different teams because you don't have to be in the same place as them. Everything is virtual. So I think that's a huge part of a lot of people's stories at Wayfair in the service space. Even before I came, that was happening. So I think there's always been sort of a virtual element anyway built into I think the culture. But yeah, I think it's allowed a lot of people to remove physical barriers and go and figure out where do I want to take my career here and get to network a little bit easier too, a lot easier actually. Get exposed to a lot.
We talked about it earlier in our conversation, about giving people those opportunities to change departments. One of our focuses and our value propositions at ZIZO is that we help reduce attrition because there's a cost to it. Is there a cost for people moving from one department to another? Is there additional training? Is there that now you have to replace that person? Is the benefit also have its consequences?
I don't know the money answer to that, but I will say that we try to celebrate anytime anyone moves. So it's a big part of our comms strategy in partnership with the internal comms team is get that information from the HR department. Who has been promoted? Who moved departments? Who stepped into a new role? And so let's celebrate that in our newsletters, because going back to what is the culture we want to build at Wayfair, it's you can grow here. So
Nice.
From my experience, I haven't seen any grumblings about like, oh, well, that person left, so I have to replace them. It's, oh my God, amazing. Like, let's celebrate the fact that this person could go into this new space and now they have a whole new career. So
it's awesome.
That's kind of been my experience with like that type of movement. And it's definitely in the last few months been something we've been honing in on in partnership with the comms is let's engage people with the actual like development space. And going back to the point of like frontline agents, that's not their dream job. Like it's oftentimes they need the money. They don't have experience, something else. Maybe they're just really loyal to the brand, whatever. There's a lot of different reasons, but it is a jumping off point for a lot of people.
Sure.
And we celebrate that at least in our space.
You had said something. I don't know. Is it your motto? You can grow here. I love that.
Should be
such a great saying.
One of our people principles. So people principles is kind of our core values, right? That we live, Wayfair wide, not just service. And so it's something that we build into our monthly recognition program. So that is which people principle is this person embodying? Why are you nominating them? One of the people principles is adapt and grow. Like it's built into the DNA, if you will, of like how the founders, Steve and Neeraj, talk about Wayfair as a whole, right? So it's definitely not something I think that anyone is like, oh no, this is a cost. It's, hey, this is great. Yeah. We are a place that can adapt and grow.
How big is Wayfair as a whole organization? I mean, Wayfair services a couple thousand.
Last I heard, it was like 15,000 total.
Nice. And how many countries?
6 countries.
6 countries. It's beautiful. And how long has it been around? It's not that old of a company, right?
I think about 22 years now.
22? Oh, it's a lot older than
I know
I
it
thought,
was their 20th anniversary when I started. It's been 2 years since I started, so about 22. Nice. It's not very old at all.
Yeah, but it's grown considerably, and they've got a great product. We furnish most of our offices here with Wayfair, so we're very familiar with the company, and we hope to partner with you guys in the near future here. Which is it's a good kind of last point here, which as you know, we've been working with you here, open to onboard Wayfair or ZIZO with Wayfair. And, one of our value props is, we help engage users through managing an inclusive, fair and objective incentive program through gamification. And I know you guys have a budget for incentives that you use to distribute rewards. And, I think part of your objectives is to try to get as many people involved as possible. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why we're hopefully attractive to as a solution. But compensation versus incentives, I know that compensation, people needed, the cost of living is going up considerably, and people make their decisioning based on what sort of compensation that you offer. But how do you value incentives as part of that? Does it play a role? Is it do you feel like it should be, I don't want to say mandatory, but an important and integral part of attracting and retaining talent?
Yeah. I think it's definitely a tool to create a place where people are rewarded extra for doing the extra. And I think intrinsically as humans, we want to be doing good and we want to be patted on the back. And everybody makes a paycheck I mean, it's necessary to live, right? That's table stakes to having a job. That's what means having a job. That's what having a job means. But I think the incentives piece is a tool to to recognize the behaviors that we want to see at our company. That's kind of how I would summarize it. And in my opinion, yeah, I think that's mandatory, because if you want to build a culture and a place of work that fosters innovation and growth and all the sort of like stuff outside of just your daily responsibilities, because that's where you become a successful company, is the smart thinking, the agile decision making, the team collaboration, all that stuff you're not getting paid for. Like that's not part of your like hourly salary paycheck, right? But that's where incentives comes as a tool to foster those types of behaviors. And so by incentivizing and rewarding people for showcasing those behaviors, that's where you see the long-term benefits as a company, right? And that's also where your culture comes from. You know, so I think marrying what culture you want to build with the incentives, that's the how we're incentivizing it. That's a nice little marriage there, in my opinion.
Nice. Yeah, no, I love it. I think it's an ingredient in the recipe of building culture.
Yeah, exactly.
And, you know, one of the things that, you know, we try to do is try to scale that, right? And, you know, to try to get it to as many people as possible and try to keep it fair and objective, so that way it's not abused. Because it's we found that even in our organization when I was running a call center, that it was the same people that were winning it all the time, and you know, you're alienating and kind of just demotivating the rest of the staff. And so, you know, trying to make things more equitable, more fair, more distributed across your workforce. Do you find that as a challenge in your role? And, you know, how do you address that?
Yeah, huge challenge. You know, it's really our frontline leadership that tends to decide whether there's any contests they want to run, or, you know, those kind of monetary incentives as far as driving performance. But where my team comes in is, have we thought about all the different nuances of who's going to be actually part of the contest? And is that fair? So there's so many different departments and teams in service, and they all have different metrics. I think the one that everybody shares is customer satisfaction scores, because they're interacting with customers. Like that's the commonality. But every other metric, there's different goals, there's different cadences where they report those numbers. And so it's really, really hard to have a one size fits all network level incentive, because then you'll get people being like, well, that's not fair. My shifts don't account for that type of interaction, or my team doesn't focus on that type of KPI. So that means we're just, we don't matter. Right. So yeah, you have to be really careful about scaling for the sake of scaling and forgetting the fact that like, there's just so many nuances in performance specifically, or the KPIs rather. And it kind of goes back to one of the points I made earlier, is knowing your audience and knowing the people that you are building these programs for. You got to do your homework. You got to understand like, what are all these, how do all these teams work and how do they sync and because if you don't have that context, and this is where I definitely lean on our frontline leadership because they're in that space, right? But it's just calling that out and making sure that they're thinking about that. Which it's not that they don't, but that's the challenge, right? Is how do we set up something that everyone can feel part of? Yeah, participate in. But it actually, does it drive our goals, or does it drive impact? No, not unless you create nuanced ones, because they're all different pieces of the puzzle to the greater goal, right? So yeah, it's definitely a challenge. It's like efficiency, scalability, yeah, a lot of complexities.
One of the things that we've been doing with our current customers and some of our prospects, and I feel that this has been very successful for us in helping categorize KPIs, and something that we hope to work with you and your team on, is we've identified 5 different categories of key performance indicators. One is behavioral, right? Things like showing up to work, showing up on time, you know, availability, especially in a remote team, if you have to log into a system to be available for customers. These are measuring behavior, and those can be somewhat universal, right, across all departments. And then you have the second category is effort. You know, effort doesn't require skill. It's a work ethic, right? It's how many, what are your effort-based KPIs? How many number of phone calls did you take? How many phone calls did you make if you're an outbound company? How many chat messages did you respond to? These are effort-based KPIs. Then you have your skill. So skill and results are the next two, and they're very, very related, right? So if you're handling a phone call, what is the customer satisfaction score? That's a result. It also requires a skill, to be able to do that. And maybe part of that skill is if you do some call recording and call scoring, right? Did they introduce themselves? Did they use their first and last name? Did they say the name of the company? A lot of different companies use different scorecards depending on the department's roles and responsibilities. Collections uses Mini Miranda and things like that in their scorecarding. And then the fifth one being engagement, because we feel that engagement with your work helps develop the culture, because it's not just about you, it's about the team, it's about the customer. It's a lot of stakeholders involved. But do you find, do you guys do that? Do you guys have categories of KPIs? And if so, how are they different? And what are the ones that you emphasize on outside of customer satisfaction?
So not a complete expert on the KPI, like all of the KPIs in frontline, but they're the ones that can kind of come to top of mind for me is, did we resolve the issue for the customer the first time? So we're just reducing the callbacks, reducing the callback loop. So that's definitely one big category of KPIs that Frontline definitely has their eyes on in service at Wayfair is, did we provide the right solution for that customer the first time? Because at the end of the day, obviously we need a job, like we're in service, but ideal state is no customer calls us ever because they don't have any problems ever. But that's obviously not realistic. But the more we can reduce the number of times they contact us, the better. Yeah. That's one category of KPIs.
So I guess I should have asked the question a little bit differently, which was
no.
No. I asked it the wrong way. So because one of the things we work with banks, and in banks, it's a heavily regulated space.
Yeah.
And from a regulator's perspective, they look at if you incentivize results, you're encouraging bad behavior. So banks are very timid about incentivizing results. And so we've shifted our focus. Well, incentivize behavior, incentivize effort. And those will ultimately lead to the positive results that you're looking for, because you don't want to ignore results. You just don't want to put the emphasis on it. And so just if from a perspective of customer service in an unregulated space, I'm sure, there can be lawsuits if they say, this is your frontline workers, they're dealing with your consumers. Things can happen, right? But do you feel behaviors or effort is more important than skill in results, or do you feel that they're equally balanced?
It's tough to answer that. I want to say they're equally balanced. Yeah. No, it's a great like esoteric topic. Skills are trainable, right? That's something that we can build into our onboarding and our training and our recurring coaching. I think behavior is something that isn't necessarily taught, but it's emulated. And that's why I feel like incentivizing behaviors like that is actually more important than the skill piece, because you're again building like, this is the type of feeling that we're exuding to our customers, right? So like, yes, everybody has to introduce themselves to the customer, first contact resolution, but how did we treat that customer? Did we empathize with them? Did we provide them with multiple different solutions and give them the autonomy to choose what works best for them? That's the behavior part that I think incentives should actually be more focused on, because that's the relationship building, the trust building, both with your team and the customer, which down the line obviously has business impact. So hopefully that answers your question. That would be my...
Yeah, no, it was an unfair question. It's, I think, more of an operational side of things question, because they're dealing with the KPIs directly. Okay. But we are close to running out of time here. I really appreciate you coming on our podcast and sharing your insights and your experience. And I love the unique approach that you came from customer or consumer analysis and analytics, and now you're dealing with the other side is with the frontline workers and combining those two. It's awesome. I want to give you an opportunity. Do you have any questions for me?
Wasn't prepared for that. I think what lights you up Jimmy, what lights you up at your job?
You know what? I'm a very passionate person. I'm a solution oriented person. So I love finding the challenges and like when I see unique challenges, new challenges, I love finding a solution for them. And, it's a good type of stress, whether it's in my business operations, how am I dealing with my own business challenges, or for our customers where, hey, we have, as I just explained, we cannot incentivize results because it's regulated and this, that, and the other. So finding a solution for that to me is what lights me up. I like a good challenge. Yeah. I'm very competitive. And you'll find that here very shortly when we do our trivia game together. But it's a great question. Yeah. I love a good challenge.
Love that.
Any other questions?
We'll
give you one more if you have
one. What's your biggest accomplishment to date that you're most proud of?
Wow. That can happen. So many different angles I can take that. I think my number one purpose in life is being a father, and raising two amazing kids is probably the thing that I'm most proudest of.
Yeah.
Building a company, building a team, creating a family with that team is, I think, almost as fulfilling to me because it's still, we family is part of our core values. And it's, I built the organizations the same way I try to build my family and run my family is, through empathy, through pushing, and encouraging. It's like, hey, when you fall down, you get up, you got to be persistent. Being a father and being a leader at an organization are my two biggest accomplishments.
Love that. Good one.
Thank you.
Like it.
All right. Well, time has come. You just heard, I'm very competitive. So this is a trivia we're going to bring.
I might flip up really badly on that.
No, you know what? We've got Emma. Emma, are you going to join us here? You are going to set us up with the trivia. We'd like to do either first to five or best of five. And so Emma's going to read the question. It's a trivia question. And then if you know the answer, just buzz in and just spit out the answer. Okay. And then we'll keep score. Emma, you ready?
What is the national bird of the United States?
Bald eagle.
What language is spoken in Brazil?
Portuguese.
Portuguese. Oh, nice. You got it first.
Who directed the movie Jurassic Park?
Steven Spielberg.
You're crushing it.
Child of the 90s. Gotta know my 90s trivia.
What is sushi traditionally wrapped in?
Seaweed paper.
I knew
3 to
it.
1.
I let Jimmy on this one.
What is the main ingredient in hummus?
Chickpeas.
Who is the author of the Harry Potter series?
J.K. Rowling.
I can't. Yeah.
How many players are there in a soccer team?
10?
8? I don't know. Soccer. It's not my sport.
What is the highest grossing film of all time?
Titanic.
In what decade was the internet created?
70s.
80s?
How many teeth does an adult human have?
32.
32.
Who invented the light bulb?
Edison. That's an easy one. He actually didn't invent it, but he gets the credit because he patented it. But
yeah,
it's another conversation. So 4-4. Ready, Negra? This is it. Next one wins.
What is the hottest planet in the solar system?
Mars.
Mercury.
Who composed the music for the Nutcracker?
Tchaikovsky. I'm just making that word up.
No, zero classic. I mean, not zero, but very little. Oh, nice. Okay.
I took a guess. Oh, wow. Okay. That is an interesting way to win. Negra, thank you so much for coming on our podcast. It was great. It's such a pleasure to have you on our show. Hopefully we can have you on again in the near future.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
What a fantastic and insightful conversation with Negra Tutundzic from Wayfair. She really highlighted how engagement and recognition work best when they're personalized, and how rewards are just one of many tools to build a strong, positive culture. Negra also shared how Wayfair is committed to celebrating growth by offering their agents opportunities to explore and move across departments, reminding us that fostering internal mobility is key to maintaining a motivated and dynamic workforce. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back with more great discussions soon. And remember, it's game time.